a truly decisive moment came with the arrival of a younger Soviet leader, generational change, in the form of Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev in 1985, who was determined to make communism really work by reforming it. That reform helped to usher in a process that soon escaped his control. In one country after another across the Eastern Bloc, the call for reform went up. And those calls, those demands, often went far beyond the officially sponsored reform that Gorbachev had originally had in mind. Dissent, in other words, spread far beyond the ranks of those first determined dissidents. And that included the quite heavily controlled and surveilled state of East Germany. Mass meetings in the cities of East Germany allowed increasing masses of people to realize that their discontent, their desire for change, were shared things, not just individual emotions. In Leipzig, first of all, massive protest crowds grew and demonstrated peacefully. And soon those demonstrations also were extending to Berlin. It's at this point that there intervened accident or coincidence as a force in history. And here we might ask, how much of our own lives is actually ruled not by our plans or our intentions, but by accident? In this case, it was a bureaucratic mistake, a bureaucratic blunder, and one, moreover, that was recorded live. So the embarrassing confusion of that key moment was actually immortalized. And this is how it went. The East German state shed itself of its earlier leadership, tried to reform from within, and began to institute new rules for freer travel abroad, which was one of the demands that was being made at the time. The new rules were being worked out and considered and debated by the communist government with the plan that they would be enacted in a rational and ordered way sometime in the near future. The drafts had not been worked out fully, but then on the night of November 9th, 1989, a member of the Politburo was participating as a spokesman in a disorganized press conference. And he had just moments before the press conference been handed a press release about these draft plans. He hadn't had a chance to read it over carefully beforehand, so he didn't really know the context, but he read it out. When the reporters heard about the promise of freedom of travel, one reporter shouted out to him, to Günter Schabowski, the spokesman, "When does all of this come into effect?" The flustered spokesman, who didn't really know the answer, improvised and maybe got caught up in the excitement of the moment. And he said, "Immediately." Astonished East Berliners, who had just witnessed this exchange on live TV, could scarcely believe what they'd heard, but they went out to find out what the reality was. They went out to the border crossings to find out what was really going on. And the short answer was confusion reigned at the border crossings and the Berlin Wall as well. The border guards were standing there without orders. Some who had been listening to the press conference had heard exactly the same words as ordinary East Berliners have, and nobody knew. Nobody knew what the official line was to be. And as the crowds grew and grew, confused guards, rather than shooting, rather than responding with violence, simply stood aside. Soon crowds were passing freely into West Berlin, climbing on the wall, eventually smashing at it with hammers or whatever other objects they could find near to hand. This was an epic moment. It led to scenes that are unforgettable for anybody who woke up to them in the aftermath. Scenes of crowds atop the wall itself at the Brandenburg Gate in the center of Berlin, where just days before one might have been shot to death for this trespass. Now masses of celebrating and often intoxicated people were engaged in a euphoric moment. And it didn't stop with this. Popular protest for fundamental change in East Germany grew, and a dynamic that was unstoppable had developed. The crowds had started by shouting, "We are the people," and then their chants changed to "We are one people," hoping for reunification, the organic growing together of what had been artificially separated as two German states. And the changes came fast and furious. Less than a year after the Berlin Wall was brought down, Germany was reunited in October of 1990. This proved to be part of a much larger cascading historical process. By the end of 1991, other communist regimes in Eastern Europe had collapsed, and the Soviet Union itself also collapsed, and an entirely new geopolitical reality had to be understood. In 1990, as all of this was going on, I was actually able to visit the wall and to witness already what was a ruined set of fortifications. And then I was able to actually rent a sledgehammer from an enterprising person who was standing nearby, so that for 5 minutes, at the cost of a few Deutschmarks, I could actually go and smash away at what was left of the wall myself. And I can tell you from personal experience, that was a deeply satisfying several minutes. What had been the inviolate and forbidding ceremonial precincts of the state, the very center of East German power, now was more open for visitors. And so it was possible to cross those earlier barriers and to witness what East Germany was like in the very moments when it already was starting to fade away. And so there were scenes like this of something that would have been forbidden earlier. The appalling disrespect of an American tourist who has actually climbed up onto the statue of Marx's lap right here at the ground zero of East German state power. And incidentally, that American tourist is myself, and the photograph was taken by my wife in these heady days.